Education there, and she's a teacher by profession. She has served as a volunteer for the Mennonite Central Committee in Paraguay, South America, for 2 years. She married a Canadian, and together she and her husband went to Japan in 1953, and she is also fluent in Japanese and several other languages. She retired in 1983 in Regina and is still living there at present. She is a volunteer for the Mennonite Central Committee, Self-Help Shop, and the Canadian Cancer Clinic. They have 3 children in Toronto, in Calgary, and in San Diego, California, and she is the grandmother of 3 charming granddaughters. She's an American by birth, but is Canadian at heart. She's a landed immigrant status. Please help me welcome Viola Ediger.
I'll try not to stumble over these chords here. I want to thank you all for giving me this wonderful opportunity to go through a lot of books and to go through a lot of memories and to just think about a lot of things that I did in Japan. It's been about 8 years since I returned from there, and you know, the memories get just dimmed a little bit, not very much, but just a little bit, and it was so good to get back into them and to think about them. In fact, I am thinking about going to Japan this fall, and it's kind of helped me to just look at all these books and the pictures and wonder how much has changed since I was there. Anyway, thanks for this good opportunity to do that, and also to be with you today. Japan is a land of protocol. There seems to be a system, a way of doing almost everything. It's partly cultural, and I think it's partly religious too, because a lot of their Buddhist and Shintoist customs and ceremonies are connected with the culture. They teach you how to sit. I mean, there's a way to do that, you know. A woman just does not cross her leg. Let's see now. Certainly on a stage, you never cross your legs. And in fact, most other places you don't either, if you're a proper woman. And they teach you how to kneel, how to bow, kneeling, and how to bow from a standing position. You don't just bow your head a little bit, you bow from the waist. And you put your hands just at the right places and all that kind of thing. They teach you how to hold a teacup, a Japanese teacup. You hold it in your left hand, and you kind of take a hold of it like this, and then you drink your tea just this way, you know, a little bit at a time. That's one thing they teach you. They also teach you how, you know, this furoshiki is what they call this square of material here, and you can wrap almost anything in a furoshiki. You just kind of wrap it up. They sort of teach you how to do that, and a gift that you take somewhere or you go shopping, you at least pop it into your purse, and you always have a wrapping for something. I call it my suitcase, I have sometimes called it. It's kind of expandable. You know, you can just make it hold a lot or hold a little bit. That's one of the many things that they teach you. They teach you how, of course, didn't take very long, and we were having to learn how to eat with chopsticks. And have ever since. They teach you how to eat fish with chopsticks and not have a big mess on your plate. We were teaching English at the YWCA Gakuin, which is sort of like a junior college. And I remember the etiquette teacher who was teaching this course said, it's just such a shame that girls in Japan don't know how to eat fish properly. You know, you have a small fish on your plate, and of course the head is always over to the left side. It's laid that way on your plate, always a certain way. And then you should be able to eat the meat on one side of the fish, and you should be able to turn it over. Of course, you're doing all this with chopsticks. And you should not have a mess on your plate. All you will have is just a skeleton, a perfect skeleton on your plate if you eat it properly. They teach you how to give and receive New Year's greetings. The first day of the new year, you must go around to your friends and people to whom you feel some obligation, and you tell them that This past year you have done me many favors, so in the new year, please again do me many favors. It has some involvement, you know, it has some things behind it. It's like one Japanese man said, there's always meaning behind meaning and law behind law, all of those things. It goes on and on and on. You're not always quite sure what it all means. They teach you how to give a gift. I mean, protocol. The protocol teaches you how to give a gift and how to receive a gift. You can, you will wrap a gift up in a furoshiki perhaps, and you unwrap it rather quickly, and then just hand the gift to the person you want to receive it, because if you give it in the furoshiki, it means that she will have to put a gift back in and give it back to you. And of course you can't allow that. So you offer this gift, and of course the person refuses. Oh, no, 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 no. I couldn't possibly take a gift. And then you offer it again, and maybe even a third time, and finally you just kind of lay it down on the floor or the step or somewhere. You just put it there. After all, you gave it. You brought it along to give, and you don't want to take it back home. In fact, a Japanese young man who came to study in the States, and we happened to be on furlough at the time, and he stayed with us for a month. And when we got back, our home church community was very kind and had a big grocery shower for us, and so we could settle in and spend the year there. And since they had heard that he was coming, was going to stay with us, they thought, well, that would look kind of bad if we got the shower and he got nothing. So they decided quickly to give him a little, offer some things for him, give him some gifts. And I remember that evening we came home, and here was this little pile of things on the floor, and he says, and do I have to give back for all of this now too? When he was married about 5 months earlier, I learned at that time that a bride and groom are expected to give back up to about 75% of what they received. That doesn't mean just tit for tat, you give it back right away, but it means you keep very well in mind who and what has been given you, and so that somewhere in the course of the next few years you make it a point to do that. Although some people get around that very nicely by inviting you to the wedding ceremony, which is often at a hotel or some other large conference place. And especially if it's at a large hotel, you know that these little money envelopes, there's a special money envelope which is especially for a wedding, and you're expected to put at least 10,000 or 15,000 yen in the envelope. And then when you leave the ceremony, you've had this big dinner, and you've had 14 pieces of silver that you've had to pick out from, and you've ready to go home, and then as you leave, they hand you a nice big bag full of something you don't know what. And it's a present of some kind. I have a nice soup bowl and a soup tureen and some serving bowls, and I have an air pot and things like that we received at weddings. My daughter has a very big blue bowl, just beautiful, that she got as a wedding gift. You're the guest, remember? You received that. Of course, you have given, 10,000 yen, 15,000 yen, something like that. Well, you learn how to be a guest, and as you come into the home, you, of course, there's what they call the genkan, the entryway, and you leave your shoes there. You don't just kind of kick off your shoes or anything like that. You take off your shoes and you turn them around so that when you're ready to leave, you can step right into the shoes. You don't just leave them as you came in, because then the host or hostess has to turn them around for you, and you can't let that happen. Well, it's also what we know as a shame culture. Our culture here in the West is a guilt culture. If you don't do something, or if you do something, or if you don't do something, you feel guilty about it. Well, their culture is a shame culture. For example, a mother may say to a little unruly child, if he doesn't behave, don't do that, they'll laugh at you. And that poor child will just hide in the mother's skirts and be embarrassed forever. It's a shame culture, and that's one way they were able to control them. However, it's not always so obvious. It's after you know the language and know some more of the customs that you catch on to some of these things. It's a land of courtesies and services, and especially to strangers. It's nice being a stranger in Japan. You can go, in Tokyo, you can walk along the Ginza, which is the big shopping area, the Fifth Avenue of Tokyo, and you're walking along, and all of a sudden, you wonder, ooh, which street am I supposed to be on? Where's that subway entrance, or whatever? And somebody is very likely to come along and say, may I help you? And you say, oh, yes, I'm kind of lost. I'm looking for this, and that. And they say, oh, I'll just, it's over there. Oh, I'll just take you over there. And they actually will take you. They'll go out of their way. They might even pay a subway fare or do something to take you where you want to go. It's very nice being a stranger there. Most always, unless you can't find anybody who speaks English, and if you don't speak Japanese, you are a little bit up the stump. The department stores are very nice. They have so many nice services. They will wrap up the present you have bought, the gift to the thing you have bought, wrap it up even for mailing. You tell them that you just want to have it wrapped so it can be mailed to America, US, New Zealand, or somewhere. But you'll send it, but just wrap it for mailing. And they do that without charge. Of course, if you ask them to wrap it up, and they'll even mail it for you, of course, they'll charge you the postage, which is reasonable, if you like it that way. Restaurants, the little neighborhood restaurants will deliver food to your door. You know, you have unexpected guests, you're too busy, you can't afford, you just call the restaurant and you say you'd like to have a bowl of noodles, or you'd like to have some raw fish, or you'd like to have something, sushi or something, and you'd like to have it by about 12 o'clock, noon. And pretty soon, a little bicycle man will have come, and he'll have his little thing on the back of the bicycle, and he'll be delivering little lacquerware dishes and things that they'll ring the doorbell, and you pay for it. And then when you're finished, you don't even need to wash, actually. We do sometimes. But you just leave them outside your door, and they'll be back to pick it up after a while. It's very convenient. There's great respect for age, and some of us are getting to appreciate that already, because, you know, after all, you've finally grown up into the years when you demand a little, or can receive a little respect. People do listen to the advice of older ones. Very often, the grandparents will live right with their families, or the mothers and fathers will live with their sons, and if there are other children, they will live there all together. In fact, I remember teaching in a Japanese private girls' school for 6 years, and in the course of that time, I got to know a number of the teachers, and one teacher told me that she had just gotten married a year or so before that, and she went to live with her husband's family. Well, there were other unmarried brothers and sisters. There was one married brother with his wife and children who lived there, and there was one mother, the grandmother of her husband, also lived in that home, all together. And I said, well, how do you sort out what you do in that home? She said, it took me a whole year to do that. She finally found out that her job was just simply to take care of her room, do her own laundry, period. That's all. The grandmother was the cook, because if she didn't cook, she didn't get the foods that she liked. The mother was sort of, you know, the general, a cleaning person, taking care of the grandchildren. That was it. So eventually, and they never really told her in so many words what her duty really was. She just had to kind of quietly observe and think and chat around a little bit and try to find out what her job was. In the trains, and the trains are wonderful in Japan. They are absolutely super in Tokyo. I remember we would go to my husband and I both, we were missionaries there, but we also taught a good many years. I think they saw us coming and they said, here's an English teacher for my daughter, my son, my somebody. And they were asking us immediately, would we please teach them English? And of course we thought, we didn't really come to teach English, but you can't just go around being negative and saying no, no, when you just come. So we started out, and we did it actually 30 years. Anyway, we were riding in the trains, a lot of the trains in Tokyo, and from one station where we lived at Ogikubo, the trains were so crowded in the morning. You saw them, you've heard about how they push you into the trains. Well, they did that, and so we thought, well, we'll wait for the next train. exactly the same. The third train, well, see, they came half a minute apart, so that wasn't so bad. So finally we decided, nope, we can't wait anymore. We just have to crowd in. So we crowded in. We were not such small people either, so we didn't feel like really crowding them too much, but we had to get there, so we had to do it. In the trains, there will be occasionally a person will get up for an older person, but more often they even get up for a mother and a child who are standing holding onto the strap. And what does the mother do? She doesn't put the child on her lap. She puts the child on the seat and she stands, almost without fail. I never caught on to that very well. I always put the child on my lap if I ever got a seat given to me. As I mentioned, they do listen to the advice of the seniors, of the older people. In fact, it was toward the end of our term. We were planning to go back, and my husband had a meeting with a group of pastors and others, and they were going to discuss whether they should sell this piece of excellent property in a wonderful location and buy something 2 hours outside of Tokyo where you could buy a lot of land, where you would have to spend a lot of money developing it. And my husband's personal opinion was, no, you never sell a good located piece of property. You just don't do that. Even if it's worth about, I don't know, 100,000 yen a square foot or something like that. So he decided he was not going to vote. He was just going to be quiet and let them decide. We were leaving Japan, and so he said it wasn't of any concern of his anymore after that. They would have to live with whatever decision they made. So they decided they were going to sell. And all of a sudden someone said, "But Ediger, you haven't spoken yet." Well, he said, "I didn't intend to." "Oh, we can't decide anything until you have spoken." So finally, he did have to, reluctantly, say what his opinion was. They didn't sell the property. Family life in Japan. That has suffered a great deal through the years. I imagine you have read some of those same articles in Reader's Digest that have occurred here and there. And you've read about the way for one thing, I think there is a kind of a depression or a mental illness that is coming to somewhat older people who have for years and years been, I call it, the men more married to their jobs than they are to their wives. And it is showing up now in some unpleasant ways. The men must stay at their offices, at their jobs, until the boss, the person over them, has left. Now, we lived on the 5th floor of an apartment building. Across the street was another five-story apartment building, but it happened to be just a little bit lower than ours, and I could look right into the 5th floor office. And every day I saw a man wrapping up something in the furoshiki, I think a big black book or some kind of special book that he was wrapping up, and he'd wrapped it up in one and then in another one. I can tell you just what he did. And then he would finally leave, maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock. And outside I saw the car was waiting, and the young fellows, must have been about 6 or 7 of them, all around, kind of just waiting around, hanging around, not being able to go until their boss had come down, gotten into the car, and had gone. Then they could finally leave. Well, you know what that does. That delays a whole lot of things. By the time a person like that gets over to the place where he can take a train or a bus home, by the time he rides the train, let's say for an hour, very often an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe even 2, it gets very late. Or maybe he also stops on the way to have a drink or to eat some sushi or something on the way home. It gets late, and the children are often in bed by the time the father gets home. And the children are off to school, or maybe the father is off to work early enough to catch the early train, 7:30, 7, and the children maybe aren't up yet. So the children hardly see their fathers until the weekend. And maybe even then, one of my friends who lives in Regina, and I was attending university there, he said he seldom even saw his father for a week at a time, because on Sundays father went golfing. He had to have some enjoyment of his own. To say nothing of what happens to the kids afterwards. Well, Mr. Morita CPA. What is it here? Certified Public Accountant? CA? CA, or whatever, one of those things. Anyway, he was a good friend of ours. He told us that there was going to be, this was already maybe 8 or 10 years ago, he says people are writing about what happens to fathers and children when fathers do not get to spend time with their families. As the children grow up, they kind of just, their father is not an important person in their family. And the father just is not really appreciated by the children, and they don't know him very well, and they just don't have this, this close association that our children have with their fathers and mothers here. And he said he decided he was not going to let that happen. So I've been in their home sometimes when 5:30 came around and he was calling. He said, "I'll be home in about half an hour," kind of thing. And we invited them to come to our cottage in the mountains once on a weekend. And it was at that weekend that he told us about this thing about families. He said, "It's important for me to be, for my children and me to be close. I don't want to lose my children." So we're doing all kinds of things. Another young man who lived at our house for a whole year told us shortly before we left Japan that his daughter and son just don't even care to be with him at all. When he did finally have time maybe to play baseball or do something with his children, they said, "No, I don't want to." So he is estranged from his children. And now he feels very bad about that. But there was a time when he was trying to work his way up this important ladder, and he saw no other way of doing it but just that. Mothers are the mainstay of the home. They are sometimes called, as they say it, kyoiku mama. Kyoiku is the word for education, and mama, of course, you know. Kyoiku mama, it's the mama who looks after the education of the children, and she's so eager to have her children do well in school, to get into the right schools, to progress and to pass all the exams and all that kind of thing, that she does anything almost. She will arrange to have the children go to a prep school or to get additional lessons if the teacher says so, and if the teacher says so, you do exactly what the teacher says. The teachers are responsible for children from the time they leave the home until they get back to the home. The school is responsible. The teachers are responsible for the children. So the kyoiku mama will do just anything that's absolutely necessary. Well, she looks after everything. When there's a child in the family that is taking an important examination, and I suppose many of you have heard that there is what is known as an examination hell in Japan. Examination, examination, examination. And you have to pass these examinations to get forward, to move yourself through the education system. And if you fail the exam, you are just out of it. You have to go to a private school, or you have to go to vocational school, or you have to do something else, and that's not the way they want their children to go. So the kyoiku mama pushes and pushes. And when there is a time of, for example, when an older child is let's say grade, what would it be? 9. They finished junior high. 7, 8, they finished grade 9, or finishing grade 9, and that much is, of course, compulsory education. After that, they have to pass an examination to get into high school, grade 10. So, examination time, you have to study, study, study. Or you've finished grade 12 and you're trying to study for exams to get into university. You will probably apply to at least 3 universities to be sure, maybe 4, so you get into one. You pay a very stiff fee to take the entrance exams, of course, for each one. But the whole family goes into low gear. No holiday, no excitement, nothing that will destroy the equanimity, the peace in the family home. Everything is deferred until after examination time. So the whole family is quite peaceful, almost in an eerie sort of way. But you see, they're all trying to help this person to pass the exams. Exams almost on all levels. I mentioned, getting into senior high and into university. But there are also exams for getting into certain important kindergartens, for example. Some years back, and I guess it's quite a few really, when the present emperor, who was Crown Prince Akihito then, his oldest son was just getting into the kindergarten years, And it was known that he would be going to such and such a kindergarten. And you wouldn't believe how many people wanted their child, their son, their daughter to be his classmate, to enter the same kindergarten, to be in that same class. And so, of course, they had to have what? Exams. So the kindergarten children had to take all kinds of exams. And I suppose quite a few were eliminated. And even a few got in. But even so, even at that point, there were exams. And you can imagine how there's a tenseness, and there is through the years, we began to feel that. Maybe it's no wonder my husband had to have bypass surgery after a while. You just kind of get into this momentum, and everything is just like that. Your own children, too. Our children went to a private school. There are about 8 or 9 or so different ones you can go if you want an English education, and many more if you want a Japanese education, depending on how much money you can afford to spend on that. But we even felt it in our own family, some of this momentum. It's just like it's snowballing. And through the years, you do get quite involved that way. Many girls will get a major in English literature or Japanese literature. It's like a fine arts or some kind of a general major in universities. But it's no matter. When you get a job with a certain company, it may be completely unrelated to your major. The company will train you. Don't worry, if you, even if you get a job in some field, maybe even economics, though you're an English major or Japanese literature major, it's okay, don't worry about that. Your company will train you. If you have maybe the right connections. Connections are so important. One, you might be interested in the word they used for connections. They call it kone. Makes sense, doesn't it? Connections, kone. Once you get the job, you don't just go around looking for another good one or a better one somewhere along the way. How am I doing? Got a few pages yet. I forgot to ask you when I'm supposed to quit. Can I keep going for a few more minutes? Okay. Marriage. You know, I was told that it was difficult to really get a lot of, like the previous speaker, he was in the field of medicine, so he was able to tell a lot of things about medicine. But I was told that some of us were having a little hard time getting a lot of information if that wasn't our particular field, and I must say it didn't happen to be mine. So I have kind of dug around into many areas, but each of these areas do affect a person in their health in one way or another. Well, anyway, a little bit about marriage. We're all interested, aren't we? A few years ago, there was a little saying, and the Japanese had a quaint way of saying it, that there were 3 requirements that every girl had of a future husband. One was a certain income. At that time, it was, I forget what, 30,000 yen or something like that, which is almost peanuts right now. But it had to be a certain income. It had to be no mother-in-law. Not living with a mother-in-law, and it had to be an apartment. You didn't want to live with a family. And it was quite well known that these were 3 requirements that most girls had at that time. And it was quite special because girls had not been quite so bold up to that time. Something about, let me see. Oh yes, I must say something about children, bringing up children. We had some good friends, and we got to talking about their ideas of bringing up children. You know, some of us were brought up rather strictly, weren't we? We couldn't do certain things, and so we kind of had this idea that, you know, we have to bring them up right early so that they know where the boundaries are and so that they don't do all these things that embarrass us. Well, the Japanese idea of bringing up children is just the opposite. This fellow was telling me, he says, you start very narrow and then you gradually give them lots of freedom. He says, we start this way and we gradually pull in the ropes and we end up like this. They said, how can a child be nobi nobi, which means grow, grow, if you start like this. And then gradually they get more freedom. He said, we want them to grow, expand. So we start like this, and then they gradually pull in. By the time they get into first grade, well, that's where the disciplining begins. Up till that time, almost disgusting how much freedom they sometimes have. They just monopolize the whole family, and they can do absolutely anything they want to. It's really quite a problem. Let's see. I'm going to have to choose some of this stuff here. It's kind of a land of contrast. Japan, it is. It's like this, but it's also like this. You can never say, this is the way it is in Japan, 100%. It's never that way. Of course, we can't say that of Canada either, can we? There are arranged marriages. It's still being done, and very successfully. And then there are love marriages. You go to university and you meet that wonderful fellow, and you can get married that way. But undoubtedly, at the wedding ceremony, there will be this go-between, which is a very important part of the marriage ceremony. There's the old and the new. The Japanese kimono is still popular, and you'll see women dressed so moderately, so very well modernly. And at weddings, you'll see the kimono. They even have a white wedding kimono, and with all the headgear and all that kind of thing. And you'll see them wearing modern white wedding dress. In fact, sometimes weddings are classified according to, is it a 3-change wedding or just a 2-change wedding? They may start with a kimono, and you change to a white wedding dress, and then eventually you'll have a white, beautiful, or not a colored, or some very beautiful long evening dress. It's a 3-dress wedding. And you've probably put 15,000 yen in the envelope, too. Sometimes I still want to do things like I learned in Japan. You know, after 30 years, and when we left, that was half of my life. So I was quite influenced, as you can imagine. And I still act that way sometimes. Someone wants to give me something. One day, the pastor invited me to come to his home, and I says, no, I don't think so. I really wanted to go in. I wanted to talk to them. But I said no, without thinking almost. Then his wife came in and invited me too, and so I finally went in. Only later did I realize what I had done. And you do remember to thank people. Of course, you thank them naturally when you receive something, when they do something for you. But it's very important also to thank them the next time you meet them. You must thank them again for that gift the next time you meet them. And as a Japanese member of one of our classes said, what you do in Japan is that you always thank, and you must never forget that, but you always forget that you have given something. You remember to thank, and you forget that you gave. That's very important in Japan. In fact, when my husband would take a trip to some other part of Japan, and with maybe even with someone else, and he was entertained in some home, and he enjoyed this, he enjoyed that. So the next time I meet that person, it may be a year, it may be a year and a half, maybe 2 or 3, I must not forget that. And I must be sure to say, oh, thank you very much for taking my husband in, for giving him such a happy time, and for this, this, that, that. It's kind of hard to remember sometimes, over that period of time, but it's really very important. There's a real sense of humility. I think even the doctor earlier mentioned a sense of humility, not looking people in the eye. That's true in Japan too. Or in the things that they say. When you give a gift, maybe you have it all wrapped up in your furoshiki, and you give this gift and you say, it's nothing, it's just nothing, it's worth nothing at all. Or you say, when you invite someone to your home, you say, we have nothing but eat a lot. It's kind of hard to get used to that. It took me a long time till I got to get over the feeling that, what are they saying? It's not true. Why do they say those things that aren't true? And I finally learned, don't think that way. Just think it's a way of degrading or lowering yourself, which makes the other person look higher. See, it's humility. It makes sense that way. And you learn that when they say hi, which is a way to say not hi, how are you? It's hi means kind of a yes. It's not a promissory yes. But you can just say hi to almost anything, which means I've heard you. Hi. You can say that. But you have to learn to remember that, and if whatever it was they said hi to doesn't happen, we invited people to come to our house for supper, I remember a time or two, and they said, hi, thank you very much, arigato. And so I prepared a meal, and we waited, and we waited, and waited, no one came. Of course, part of it is also, it was the first or second time we had met, and they didn't know us very well yet, you know, so they can't just come that easily. Or 6 Japanese women came to visit me in Regina, and you know, they brought this wristwatch for me, and they brought one for my husband. That was the gift. You always kind of bring something, or take something, and I thought, oh no, these watches, they're Seiko watches. And she said, oh, don't worry about that. My son works there, and it didn't cost hardly anything. Or when you first get there and you learned a little Japanese, we actually studied Japanese for 2 years as a starter, and ever after that, and you finally learned Ohayo gozaimasu, you know, and you say, do itashimashite, arigato, and you've learned a few of those things, konnichiwa, and some of those, and they say, oh, you speak Japanese so well. And you have to learn to say, do itashimashite, nothing of the kind, you know. But we noticed a lot of foreigners who learned a few words. They said, oh, thank you very much. You know, it's just, they just have to say that so that, you know, to make you feel very good. Women in Japan are often somewhat quiet. They're not necessarily shy. They're reserved, but they know their place. That's, I guess, what we have to say. They know their place. And so they will often not say a lot. They may speak. If they invite you to a meal, they will not eat with you because they're busy serving. When you're serving, you haven't got time to sit and eat. But don't let anybody tell you that the women don't have a lot of strength. But they just are wise in not showing it always. It's deep there, and it's there. And don't ever misjudge a Japanese woman. She's very strong in her home. The husband, for years, I don't know what they do now. I suppose they have more of a system of banking where the husband's check is automatically, or his account is automatically credited with the month's salary. But there was a time when people were paid with a money envelope. I don't know how many English classes I taught, and at the end of the month I went home with an envelope full of cash. And that happened in Japan for years and years, I know. And what does the husband do but comes home and gives it to his wife, per se? You think, oh, well, that's pretty nice, isn't it? And it is. It kind of, after a while, you get to understand that whoever really handles the money has a lot of power, right? Even here, I think we can say that. So the woman has a lot of power, but she has to also make that money stretch for everything that it has to go for. That's her job, and it's quite a responsibility. In fact, a Japanese pastor was telling me, and laughingly he said, oh, you know that missionary woman over there, she asked her husband for money right in front of everybody. I thought, well, I'm sure I have done that a lot of times myself, but just not in front of him, I suppose. And at that moment, I made up my mind that I was not ever going to let that happen, for me to ask for money of my husband in front of Japanese people. So we had a nice private arrangement where I always got a certain amount of money. I wasn't employed, you know. I was just a wife. And I always got a certain amount of money every month that was mine to spend. I never had to ask my husband for money, which was a nice arrangement. But he thought that was so funny. But what I thought was funny was when I saw a husband asking his wife for train fare. And the women, I taught a really interesting women's class for about 8 years. That same class of women, we had such a good time. I learned lots about women. And they, and they would say, you know, how much do you give your husband every day? And they would say, well, let's see, about 500 yen for lunch and about 300 yen for train fare and a little extra. I give my husband, let's say, 2,000 yen every day. Oh, I don't even give my husband that much, or whatever they would say. And they would talk, and I thought this was so interesting, insight into what they actually do. I appreciated hearing about that. I really wanted to tell you about how Japan is a man's world. Some men here, they might appreciate that. Women, I know, always do. I mentioned to you about the paycheck and about the train fare. And, one little thing that I thought was really bad. There's a Japanese saying, I didn't learn this because it's supposed to be this lower kind of language. Japanese language comes in 3 levels. The upper, polite, very polite language, and the middle, the standard Japanese that you hear all around you, and then the kind that you speak to servants and people who are working. And I never learned too much of this. We did have a lesson or two in our textbooks about this, but my husband told me that sometimes wives were introduced as, quote, direct interpretation is my piggish wife. I thought, oh my goodness. But you know, it sounds awful in English. It doesn't come out quite that way in Japanese. And they don't take it that way. It just means my humble wife. And I'm introducing you up there, to my humble wife down here. And the women don't bother about that. I mean, why get uptight about something like that? Well, a few minutes now about some little notes I have about health. I was 4.5 months pregnant when I went to Japan. And my husband used to say that he went to Japan by ship, but I went by rail, he thought. That took a long time to figure that one out. I didn't quite bend over the rail too much, but I did go out to a lot of fresh air. But I'll never forget what the doctor said to me when I made my first visit to the doctor, because after all, 4 or 5 months pregnant, I had to get in touch with the doctor. And I had met him for the first time. He did speak some English, of course, or I wouldn't have been there that soon after arriving in Japan. And the first thing he said to me, and is your husband well? I thought, I was obviously pregnant. And he's asking about my husband. But I guess he was just trying to, you know, open the conversation. Well, in the end, he didn't even get there in time for my daughter's birth. The midwife had to deliver her. Nor did the doctor get there in time for my son Jim's birth. I just managed to walk up the stairs and kick my shoes off, and he was there. But you know, that did cut my doctor bill in half. I only had to pay about $60 that time. Well, there is health insurance in Japan, and it's of 2 kinds. Everyone can have a chance at health insurance. It still leaves something to be covered personally, but it is a really very good health insurance. There's old age pension. I even get it, old age pension from Japan, because we paid in. I paid in retroactively for years and years and years back, and they did have my husband, a Canadian, didn't get any because he was Canadian. So there's one time it helps to be an American. I read a little note in some of these books that I brought along here that the average size of the family in Japan now is 3.22 people. 2 adults and 1.22 children. That's the average size of the family nowadays. And they don't believe in the pill either. They use other methods. When I studied Japanese that first year, we had a lesson on what to say when you visit someone in the hospital, I thought. And I just thought of memorizing all these silly phrases, you know, I thought, I'll just play it by ear, you know, and I'll just ad-lib a little bit. And I kind of fumbled around trying to say what I wanted to say, and it didn't come out right somehow or other. I learned through experience that you say exactly what that book says you should say. No, don't mince words. You just say exactly that. And you ask about their appetite. You ask about how they're feeling, how about the pain, and this and that. And you might bring flowers or you might bring some fruit, but never bring a potted plant. That kind of has the intimation of putting down roots in the hospital. And who wants to put down roots in the hospital for too long? So don't ever bring a potted plant. My husband, having taught at a private university, he got the benefit of physical exams twice a year. The universities, the companies, the businesses employ doctors and nurses who come to their hospital or to their businesses, and they have regular physical exams periodically. If there's something seems to call for an additional checkup, then they'll recommend that you go to a hospital and see a certain doctor. But my husband had periodic exams. But when we came to the States in 1982 for my daughter's wedding, we planned to stay only 2 weeks. And while we were there, we thought, we haven't had a physical exam, this happened to be in the States, for a long, long time. And we thought maybe it'd be good just to get a physical exam here once for a change. So we had it, and it turned out that my husband needed bypass surgery. 4 bypasses. Wow, that shocked us, because we had brought one little suitcase. We were going to buy a new dress when we got here, and a new suit when he got here, and all that kind of thing. But we ended up by staying 2.5 months and had the surgery. But when we got back to Japan, those teachers at the university said, that never showed up in the test you had in the university, did it? No. Wow, there must be something wrong with the way we do things. And so they got after their medical or their physical checkup system there in that university. And they really got after it, because here we've missed something here, and we can't let this happen. Well, it's the way they do things. They really do see something that needs correcting, and they get right to work on it. I interviewed a woman. I happened to be on the board of a Japanese language institute, and we were looking for a Japanese woman to teach Japanese to foreigners. And I was interviewing a woman, and in the process, I found out a little bit about herself. Her husband had died about a year earlier or so, and I began just hearing a little bit more about her. And the interesting thing I found that time, almost a sad thing I found out, was that she had known, her family had known that he had cancer and that he was dying of cancer, but not one word, not the word cancer, nor anything intimating cancer had been mentioned the whole period of his illness, and had been a considerable length of time. In fact, it was completely denied. Oh, you're going to get well, don't be long, and you'll be well, and you'll be home, you'll be this, that. And I said, isn't that sad? Isn't that too bad that you didn't get to have a farewell, a final word with your husband? What about your children? Didn't they want to say goodbye? No, we just don't do it that way. I thought that was really sad. And I thought of, my husband died of cancer just 2 years ago. And I thought, it would have been too bad if we hadn't had any final words. My daughter-in-law died of cancer 6 months ago. And she had such a marvelous experience with her children. She told them just 2 or 3 days, one day before she went into coma, that she was going to die. She had this final little talk with the children, and that she wasn't going to be able to be at their Christmas parties and at the other parties. She would be there, but they just wouldn't be able to see her. And that is so important to the children now. They celebrated her birthday in March, and they had a party, and I said, but your mother wasn't there. Oh yes, she was there, but we just can't see her. She had such a final word with them, and she said, you children have never done anything that has hurt me in all your lives. So she took care of all the blame that sometimes comes later, that children take on themselves sometimes, or others. And she says, you've never done anything that's hurt me. Think of what it would have been like for the children not to have had this farewell message. And yet, this woman and her husband had no such farewell opportunity. Well, they had opportunities, but they just didn't take care of it. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has gone to Japan a number of times. We've had conferences where she spoke, and she has worked at doing some of that. But the culture in Japan is still very, very strong. And maybe it's because in Japan, if there is a history in your family of cancer or TB, suicide, or mental illness, it's very, very hush-hush. Because if it's known in your family that you have that, then your sister, your brother, your daughter, or someone might not have a good chance at a good marriage. This is where the go-betweens come in. They will check out the whole families for you and check out both sides of the family so that the records are very good, you have a good chance of having a good marriage. But if you have this in your family, that might spoil your chances of a good marriage. So they have some of their reasons. And lots of things that have to do with the feeling of the Japanese people. All told, it's been a wonderful experience to have been there, and I'm so glad that I was there for a good many years and got to know them. And the few things I have told you are just the tip of the iceberg of things that are yet to know. So maybe you can go visit Japan, and maybe you can talk to me, maybe you can read more, and I hope you'll enjoy what you find.
Next presenter and our last presenter for today, as far as the Education Committee is concerned, we have fellow CNA who is going to do our next presentation for us. Edna was born in Rosthern to parents of Russian Mennonite ancestry and is actively participating in Mennonite beliefs and traditions. She is also fluent in both High and Low German. Edna is a practicing CNA, as I had mentioned. She graduated from the Saskatchewan Technical Institute in 1964 and has worked at St. Paul's Hospital from 1964 to 1967, Crippled Children's Home from 1967 to 71, and is presently employed at the Rosthern Union Hospital. Many of her patients there are of the older Russian Mennonite community, and she is also knowledgeable of the various practicing Mennonite cultures in the area. Please help me welcome Edna.
First of all, I'd like to remind you that I am a CNA and not a speaker. Because of the locality of our annual convention this year, it is only befitting that the Mennonite culture be represented, as Swift Current is one of the original and one of the few still existing Mennonite settlements in Saskatchewan. What is a Mennonite? To some of you, they are unfamiliar, and others may associate them with either the Doukhobor or Hutterite, as they share the same pacifist doctrine, a strange language, and a communal organization to some degree. Some of the first settlers on the prairies were the Mennonites. When land north and west of Lake Superior were discovered suitable for expansion and habitation, the Canadian government sent scouts out to the European countries to find people that would be interested in buying land at reasonable rates. It was at this time in the steppes of Russia where, after 200 years of farming, a great feeling of unrest and upheaval was beginning. The Mennonites had previously fled persecution and the rights for religious freedom from the Netherlands and Belgium, settling in Russia, where they had been granted military exemption and the right to build their own schools and churches in exchange for cultivating the land. As time progressed and population increased, land became scarce and unable to obtain, as it was expensive. As the land had become prosperous, the Russian officials began exercising their authority and demanded that now Russian should be taught in all schools. When the scouting contingent that had been sent by Canada met with this group of unhappy conservative Mennonites, also the poor and landless, who were eager and interested in hearing of this country where land was available and in abundance. But before they agreed to come, the Canadian government had to meet the stipulations and privileges the Mennonites requested. After the government agreed to military exemption, affirmation instead of swearing of an oath, private schools, and freedom of religion, the first boatload of Mennonites arrived in Winnipeg in 1874. As they arrived in fall, their prime concern was shelter, as cold winds were already blowing. Sod houses were constructed, and for the first winter, many families lived together, as not all houses were built before the snow fell. Breaking up virgin land and preparing it for cultivation was slow and tedious, and as summer following was not in practice at this time, the land soon became infested with weeds. Also, the land in close proximity to water sources had all been taken. So when 20 years later, reports of a great untouched prairie area between two rivers in the Northwest Territories was available, many of the old colony people sold their few belongings and were on their way to this promised land. This was Saskatchewan's first introduction to the Mennonites, as they began settling in the Rosthern Hague area. As these settlers had been involved with successful agricultural methods used in Russia, they modeled their farming techniques here accordingly. Land allotted to the Mennonites were called reserves. In each reserve, colonies were built, which basically meant that villages were formed in block settlements where homes were built in close proximity of each other. Each village had a school and a church. Teachers were not necessarily educated as such, but were actually only an affluent member of the village. The schools were all taught in German, with religion being a large part of the curriculum. It was often said at this time, whenever the hunter and trapper cleared the land, the Mennonites would move in. But life was not easy. Land had to be cultivated, and time was of the essence, as weather elements played such a vital factor in land production. A lot of hard work and a simple faith led to productivity, and it wasn't long before the natives of this land identified with their new neighbors, the immigrants, and followed similar settlement patterns which are still in existence today. With the expansion of the railroads, settlements grew. The crops began flourishing, resulting in stores and business ventures coming into being. More settlers began moving in, and with progress and success also comes a different lifestyle. New schools were opened, and the English language was becoming popular. Some of the Mennonites were even becoming involved in business ventures and taking a great interest in political events. This disgruntled the conservative members, who began again the search for a new land where they could escape progress and live life simply. The government found that the reservations south of Swift Current were vacant, but believed to be of poor quality. However, the Mennonites didn't believe this, claimed the land could be worked successfully, and proceeded to inhabit and settle in this area. The progressive sector of Mennonites decided to build their own schools, where they would be able to control their school programs by educating their own teachers to teach in the villages, and thus they would better be able to monitor the amount of English taught. Thus, in 1905, the German English Academy was built in Rosthern. It is today one of the few original high schools still in existence in the province, and is now known as Rosthern Junior College. After a few years of successfully operating this school, other areas followed this example, and other church-orientated high schools were built. World War I brought about many changes. Strong, lifelong convictions were put to the test many times. The Mennonites, who had previously been respected in their communities, now became a suspicious lot, as they spoke in the enemy's tongue, and with their strong stand against bearing arms, people began to see them as allies of the Germans and not to be trusted. It was at this time many CO camps, conscientious objectors, were organized for working in lumber camps, rebuilding the destruction war had caused, and maintaining hospital and medical services. Before long, the promises of the special privileges granted by Ottawa in 1873, which were to be for all time, were being revoked. The provincial government of Saskatchewan, as well as other provinces, began to uproot all private schools, especially the German ones, and began building English schools, which were to be taught by qualified teachers. This matter of education was of earnest concern to the Old Colony Mennonites at this time. They considered this a violation of what had been promised to them, and would lead their children away from their simple teachings, and would implant in their young minds the ways of the world. This resulted in a large migration to Mexico, South America, and Paraguay, where again they were promised religious freedom and military exemption. Following World War I and the large immigration to South America, our early settlers again began the task of routine living. But rumors of great unrest and upheaval that were taking place to their relatives and friends in Russia were very upsetting. At this time, the Canadian settlers lobbied the Canadian government, requesting Canada allow these people entry into the country. Since there was again this surplus of land that needed habitation, the Canadian government agreed to this immigration of the Canadian Mennonites if the Canadians would take the responsibility of these immigrants. It was this format that resulted in one of the largest immigrations to our country. In 1923, 350 Russian Mennonites landed in Rosthern, Saskatchewan. Many of this immigrating group had been affluent landowners in Russia, but had lost all their land, most of their belongings, and many of their family members before fleeing from Russia. They were so thankful for this country that had granted them entry, and in gratitude, many of these settlers supported the Liberal Party for many years to come. At this point of time, many of the immigrants took over the land left by the Mennonites that had left for South America. These Russian Mennonites were more prosperous, more progressive in their lifestyles as the previous ones. Instrumental music was introduced into the churches, children readily attended the English schools, and the farming industry began to flourish. Because of the hardiness and resourcefulness of these people, the 30s were survived. Milk, potatoes, and flour were some of the only staples available at this time. So it is no wonder the Mennonites can now serve 101 different varieties of food, including these ingredients. As sugar was rationed and a sweet tooth was a common factor in many of these early settlers, they developed recipes where a little would go a long way. I've brought you all a sample of a traditional Mennonite sweet, the pepper nut, which is found in every home at Christmas time. The harder they are, the better they are. Babies were usually born at home. As with each immigration, the Mennonites would have women in their midst who were the midwives of the village. Doctors were seldom called, and husbands were sent to the barn. In today's society, many of the conservative fathers will still shy away from the delivery room, as this is women's territory. Along with the midwives of the village, there was also a bone setter, who was usually a male, or if female, she must be comparatively old and of husky build. With practitioners such as this living amongst the people, there was no need to go anywhere else. Home remedies were plentiful. Every plant had a useful purpose, and poultices were made from everything that could conceivably be boiled. Women of this era worked hard, but were seldom given any recognition. The man was the head of the house, and women seldom had a voice in any farming and definitely no financial matters. But women did a lot of socializing. Their hands were seldom idle. Many afternoons they would gather together to make blankets and quilts. This is still often found to be a favorite pastime for the older Mennonite ladies. Today this has become quite an art and is being taught in many community classes. Socialization and family life is a very important factor in the life of the Mennonites. Weddings and funerals were and still usually are large functions. Every event or holiday meant family or neighborhood gatherings. Where there are people, there was always food. It didn't seem to matter how much the food was rationed, there was always food on the table for the friends that had gathered. This explains why Christmas and Easter had 3 days of holidays, and all church holidays were observed. Harvesting, barn raising, and butchering were days of hard work, but when all neighbors gathered together, it also became a festive time. With the automation of farming, more and more young people were turning to the urban centers for employment. This again prompted several hundreds of people to seek alternatives. This led to the more conservative Mennonites moving to places such as Peace River, Fort St. John, and La Crete, Alberta, as they were afraid once urbanized, the young people would lose their perspectives and become involved in too many worldly concerns. In the 50s, there was another smaller immigration from Russia. These people intermingled with society, and thus this immigration was less notable than the previous two. Throughout their history, Mennonites have sought to withdraw from cultures, occupations, and practices which might compromise their religious beliefs. Such withdrawal has taken many forms: creation of self-governing colonies in the midst of alien cultures, retreat from urban to rural life, and migration from country to country. Currently, in regions like central Canada, Mennonites appear to have stopped retreating. They have become highly urbanized and participate in most professional and business ventures. Except for regular Sunday retreats to the shelters of well-built churches, involvement in the surrounding culture seems to be complete. But is it? Out of the original 52 Mennonite villages that were formed in Saskatchewan, 21 of these still survive in some form and still function in varying degrees as they once did. These villages are usually close together in localized areas. The areas are the Rosthern, Saskatoon area and the Swift Current area being the largest. Smaller settlements include the Drake-Handley area, Carrot River, Meadow Lake, Mayfair, and Mullingar areas. As there are 25 different sectors of Mennonites in Saskatchewan, I will try to accent some of the more unique cultures and their noticeable attire. If you've had time to examine the little display I have on the table, I have some of them represented there. And I'll also explain how it can relate to a hospital setting in some circumstances. The Church of God in Christ is a group that believes in simplicity in dress and lifestyles, beards and no ties for the men, black head coverings for the women. Each congregation has its own elementary school, establishing them with a minimal provincial requirement, and the teachers are non-certified. This sector does not believe in voting. The Old Colony Mennonites have resisted cultural accommodation, including public education, and have attempted to remain separate. Women wear dark clothes, aprons covering the dresses, and black head coverings. Women are quiet and subdued. Often in a hospital setting, communication is difficult as they have never mastered the English language. The husband will usually be the spokesperson for the woman. In the workforce, they are the people that will be the farm laborers, and women seldom work outside of the home. The Berchthalers are a group similar in practice to the Sommerfelders. Their dress is less conservative as compared to the Old Colony. Men seldom wear ties, but do not necessarily wear the dark shirts. The women and girls usually wear pastel dresses, no slacks, and hair is worn long and unpermed. Once married, a kerchief is worn. Any jewelry other than a wedding band is seldom used. During the past few years, more of the young people are entering the schools and graduating. When entering the workforce, they tend to avoid the unionized workplace. Scattered in various locations are groups of conservative Mennonites who may be either of the Swiss or American origin, or groups that have left the General Conference for different reasons. The cape dresses are worn, women all wear this type of dress, and one pattern serves all the women, and a prayer covering for their heads. Radios and TVs are discouraged, but farming methods are modern. They establish their own school systems and also do not accept any government assistance in any form. At times, we see a small number of the old order of Mennonites settling in various locations in the province. These, along with the old order Amish, are the most traditional of all Mennonite groups in Canada, but most of them reside mostly in Ontario. They adhere to the simple forms of life. Farming is done with little modernization, and horses and buggies are used for transportation. The ones that do come to Saskatchewan do drive vehicles, but they are of a dark color with very little chrome. Homes do not have electricity, and they seldom have curtains on their windows. They do not participate in any government insurance, pensions, family allowance, or health plans. When hospitalized, they pay for their stay and also individually pay for all their own doctor's fees. Needless to say, their hospital stay is usually short. In the poor homes, small children are often not immunized. The older generations live in their children's homes and are looked after by the younger generation. Growing up in the General Conference sector of the Mennonites and living in a community heavily populated by this sector, I didn't realize how much culture and tradition has affected a lifestyle. A strong emphasis was placed on education. Besides elementary and high school, Saturday mornings are spent in German school, and Sunday mornings are spent in Sunday school. While growing up, we were not encouraged to participate in organizations such as Brownies, Guides, or Scouts because of the taking of an oath or repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. Movie theaters and dance halls were frowned upon. Life centered around the family and the church. Upon choosing a career, one would often find them choosing a helping or caring career. Military service and law enforcement were seldom a choice. If undecided, many young people would enter a voluntary service program, giving young people a wealth of experience in all different types of work in many different countries. This is one of the many programs that the Conference of Mennonites operates and maintains. Although there are many different sectors, changing cultures, and traditions, the Mennonites stand united in maintaining a firm stand on nonviolence. Unified, they have formed the Mennonite Central Committee, which plays an active role in the helping of others both in Canada and abroad. Along with this, there is also the Mennonite Disaster Committee, which helps rebuild homes and barns following any type of disaster. Whatever our origin or background is, it is comforting to know we can reflect back. But we are fortunate to be living in this country and are all proud to be called Canadians. In nursing, we see many different cultures represented. Though they may differ from our beliefs and we may have some problems understanding, we as certified nursing assistants must always be aware of the clause in our code of ethics that says, "I will respect and protect the beliefs and personal convictions of my patients, regardless of religion, culture, nationality, race, color, creed, age, sexual orientation, or status." Let us always remember that, and in doing so, we continue to maintain just another avenue of our high standards of nursing care. Thank you.